Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar with Accord and Force Management. I'm Joe Huber, Director of Strategic Engagement at Force Management. And we're so excited you're here with us today for our session titled AI-Powered Revenue Execution. Now, before we get started, I'll introduce our speakers and run through some housekeeping items. And from there, we'll get into the executive conversation around aligning tech, sales, and productivity. We'll host some Q&A, and then we'll sign off for the day. Now, we have four incredible panelists with us today. From Samsara, we have Noelle Carlson, the Senior Director of Go-to-Market Programs. Samsara helps organizations improve safety, efficiency, and visibility through AI-powered connected operations technology. Thank you so much for joining us today, Noelle. Alan Beers joins us from Greenhouse Software, where he is the VP of Customer Success and Professional Services. Greenhouse's hiring software supports the full hiring lifecycle with tools for recruiting, interview coordination, candidate evaluation, analytics, and AI-powered hiring. Thanks so much for joining us today, Alan. And our partner for this webinar is Ross Rich, the CEO and co-founder of Accord. Accord is a customer collaboration platform built to help revenue teams manage complex sales cycles and improve alignment with buyers. They're working with go-to-market teams right now to help unify GTM collaboration, improve enterprise deal management, and create a more customer-centric buying experience. Thanks so much for being here today, Ross.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's going to be amazing. Force Management's very own Kate Wall, Managing Director, joins us as well. Now, many of you know that we help B2B companies scale and improve revenue performance. And Kate is working with customers right now to help align their AI tech to a sales discipline, embedding things like command of the message and Medic into their tech stacks and into technologies like Accord. Thank you so much for being here today, Kate. Now, I'm so excited for this panel. They are fantastic. Before we jump into the conversation, I'm going to run through a few things just so you all know. Now, just a heads up, this event is being recorded. You will receive the recap and replay after today's conversation in a follow-up email. I want you all to be able to feel comfortable and free to ask questions. Now, we have the chat function where you can chat with everybody, or if you want to ask a question anonymously, you can use the Q&A function. Feel free to use the Q&A function as well if you just want to ask your question directly. This is a practical and real discussion with real-world insights on operational excellence and revenue growth. Our goal is for you to learn how high-performing organizations like Samsara and Greenhouse, along with other organizations like Accord and Force Management customers, are creating that pivotal link between technology, AI, and their selling motion to drive business outcomes. And with that said, let's jump into the first question. I'm going to direct this one to you, Ross. Accord is often positioned as a coordination layer across the deal. And how do you ensure tools like Accord don't just organize work, but actively reinforce a defined sales methodology like command of the message throughout the buying process?
Yeah, I think this probably goes back similar to your engagements where you need to start with the strategy and start kind of higher with what is the executive initiative? What are we really trying to solve versus the technology? It's funny, like when I do kind of talks like this or go to conferences, kind of pitch against the tools and say, you need to start with the people, then the process, then the tools. Tools only reinforce things. You need to start with, the who, and then the process stuff, and then the tools. So I always think, how do you ensure this actually reinforces methodology and does the right stuff? Well, do we have a methodology in place and do we have the right people championing that? So yeah, sometimes, and like that's why I'm excited about this partnership, you need to start with, what are we trying to do with our customers? Not just tactically, not just from a process perspective and technology, but like, kind of orienting around, a big word for Force is, around outcomes and PBOs. So like, what are those things for our company and for our customers? And sometimes you need to really step back and think about what's our differentiated value? What do we do that no one else can? Orienting around your product, around marketing, around sales first. And so that's kind of where I think how you ensure tools like Accord actually reinforce methodology and the right things is you need to step all the way back and be like, what are we really trying to reinforce in the first place? Because the tools and technology and AI only as good as the things that you're trying to drive towards. And I think sometimes that gets stuck with the tooling people and the people on the front lines. And you need to really, work hard as a vendor to, part of our job. And I think, companies like Force is to drive that internal alignment. That's a lot of what we do.
I could not agree more with what Ross is saying. aligning on the outcomes we want to achieve and the overall strategy that will then drive what we're doing with the technology is critical.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think a lot of like executives look at tools as like, the admin working on it, and all of those things need to work together, which I think is so important to kind of like reorient your, especially with AI is kind of like a forcing function with that. Now that is at the executive level. How do you kind of redesign the teams? And I think both Greenhouse and Samsara are great examples of that, with like Noelle's programs team that kind of aligns all the different functions, and kind of Alan being a driving force of doing that at Greenhouse across a bunch of different functions. You really need people that are going to step up and drive that cross-functional alignment. So it's not just, the executive team comes up with a strategy, then there's the organization leaders, then there's the people that implement it. You need to figure out a way to bring all those people together, which is, as we know, working with people is kind of the hardest part of it all.
Absolutely. All right, we're going to move on to our next question. And again, if you have questions or comments or anything like that, the chat and the Q&A function are both available to you. This one's going to go to Kate Wall. From a force management perspective, where do you see most organizations struggle when trying to operationalize command of the message inside their tech stack? And what does it look like when the methodology is truly reinforced by the system?
Thanks, Joe. So answer to this really piggybacks off of what Ross just said. So I think when you have methodology, which involves a process, and then you have a system, both of those things change and evolve with time and with markets. And despite that, the hardest component, or maybe the biggest mistake I see customers make, is age old, which is forgetting the third prong. You have got your system, you've got your process, but you need to have everything related to people in place, to Ross's point, to really drive success. So keeping in mind that any systems project or methodology implementation program is a change management initiative. And I like to think of change management initiatives in terms of mindset, process, tools, and content. So the process can really be built into the tool, and that's where Accord comes in. But there's a big people aspect when it comes to building process, getting agreement, making sure, to Ross's point, that it's aligned with company strategy. Mindset is all people. And that's really important, that's aligned to strategy, and that cadences, expectations are set across functions and across teams. And of course, content can come within a methodology. It can also appear in tools like Accord. So when you have that kind of ideal combination, which Samsara and Greenhouse are such great examples of, partially, I think a lot driven by Noelle and Alan on the people side for those accounts. And then you have the right systems in place and the right people there to drive them, then you're much better set up for success. I think another thing that helps is, not all systems or platforms are created equal, and Accord is really built to get into a seller's workflow very easily. So if you have the right initiative in place and the right people to drive it forward, it's easy for it to get kind of integrated into what a rep is doing in their day-to-day. And so if you also align methodology to it, like Noelle and Alan were able to do with command of the message at their two companies, then you have the reps consciously going through an Accord-driven process that has command of the message built into it. So they're saying, okay, I'm conscious that I'm being reminded to use this new way of selling. I'm conscious that I'm doing it. I'm able to attribute my success to it. Managers go in for visibility, or their leaders go in for visibility, and they see the same thing. I can inspect based on this methodology we're rolling out, and I get really good reminders within the systems that are well embedded into my workflows. So I think when you have the right leadership in place who can pull all those things together, you're really teed up for great outcomes.
Yeah, Kate, just to jump onto that a little bit, Joe, if I can. I think the other element is bottoms up, right? So as much as you can be a great leader and sort of like galvanize around a strategy or tooling, at the end of the day, if it's not working for the field, they're not going to adopt it. So I think that's a testament to some of the technologies and methodologies that are on this call today. With that said, it's been really fun to watch from our perspective, both from command of message and also Accord in the field of the end users, the reps that are getting big wins, and they're attributing it back to the methodologies, being able to show value to prospects easier than they were before, being able to either mitigate churn or take a situation that was challenging and turn it into a big win for their customers. Those are the types of things that we see emerging on a regular basis now by joining all these strategies together. And that's when you see the snowball effect happen, right? So again, just to reiterate, it's important to do the top-down stuff, but it really starts to roll once people get wins and start evangelizing within the business.
Yeah, and Alan, I would actually add one thing to that. It's not just wins with the field, it's actually wins with your customers. So we started when we adopted Accord and then woven command of the message. We actually had customers coming back to us saying the reason we went with Samsara is your trial was super polished. Your team came together as a unified group and it felt very cohesive and consistent. And we understood what we needed to do next to move on in the process. So it wasn't just our field, but it was also our customers coming to us and sharing that positive feedback as well.
But you love to hear it, and that's what we're looking to do. And now you've mentioned this. We're going to talk a little bit here about Samsara. And at Samsara, how have you approached turning your sales tools and CRM into a system of reinforcement where your process is consistently executed rather than left up to individual reps? And this is exactly what you're talking about here, where it becomes a cohesive unit, an entire team selling, not just one person.
Yeah, and I'd actually build off of a lot of what Ross and Kate already shared. So I think the honest answer is that most companies have a lot of the right tools. They just haven't wired them together in a way that actually changes rep behavior. So for many companies, their CRM becomes a system of record, not a system of reinforcement. And so that sales training or methodology that you invested in and had your whole team trained on lives in a binder and kind of fades out over a quarter or two. At Samsara, we're trying to make a deliberate decision to change that equation. We have a phenomenal data engineering and machine learning team that has built an in-house AI engine for our go-to-market orgs. And the core design principle is that it has to be embedded into the way that our reps work, so into their workflow directly, not bolted on top as another tool. So we've actually tried to move away from the idea that process reinforcement happens only through training or manager coaching. Those things matter, don't get me wrong, but they're just not enough. A rep can sit through a great training and still forget to apply it when they're rushing between calls, writing follow-up, updating Salesforce, and so on. So we don't want our reps having to go somewhere else to get signal on their accounts or understand how to best action those signals. So what's actually the methodology we want them to follow? We need those insights, the suggested action, and the methodology to meet our reps where they already work. So for us, that's in systems like Accord, in Salesforce, and Gong. It's also critical that the language we're asking them to use aligns with our value framework. And so we got to partner with Force Management and adopted command of the message earlier this year. And we want to make sure that every rep, irrelevant of the account that they're working with, is using that consistent language, asking effective discovery questions, talking about Samsara's value, and actually differentiating us from the competition. We do not expect our reps to adopt that massive value framework we put together on their own, but we actually want it to be embedded into everything the rep does. I think a really tactical example of how we're doing this is we're leaning in heavy with Accord. So this quarter, we're partnering with Accord to launch what we are calling Smart Accords. And those Accords are going to be mostly AI populated to start. It's going to align to our sales process for that segment or geo, so we get to customize it based on the group that we're thinking about. And it uses Samsara's value framework that we put together through command of the message embedded throughout the entire process. And that's going to continue to be updated as the deal progresses and we learn more and more about that customer or the industry that we're in. So this type of example just shows that process consistency doesn't have to just be a management enforcement responsibility. You can actually lean on your system to get there, and it can be baked into every tool and every touch point. That way your managers are focusing more on coaching and not just auditing, did they follow the process that I asked them to follow?
Yeah, I think that was something that honestly took us a while to get to as a company, and like from a product vision to understand is like reps are just never going to do something that isn't in front of them. they're focused. It's not because they're lazy. I think like other systems teams, and ops sometimes talk down about sellers. It's because they're so focused on the customer, which is where you should be focused. So how do you put the value messaging? How do you put these frameworks not in a 84-page laminated binder that I was used to? And like one of the whys behind creating a board was like, there's so much gold in here. How do we get that into the conversations that our sellers and AMs and CSMs are having with clients, instead of just with the top 10, 20% who are the nerds like myself, who like actually will read that and figure out ways to incorporate it? That's just not going to be the 50th percentile person on your team, no matter how well you hire. They're going to be defaulting to what's in front of them. So how do you design your system and process to put that in the flow of work, I think is so important. And I see so many teams, unfortunately, spending so much time, money, effort on building these amazing, theoretical processes and learning things and learning paths that live outside of where the rep and the customer actually engage. And it's just like, yeah, unfortunately, a waste of a bunch of time and resources that no one's going to get to.
I think people are starting to realize this, because this is why we're so interested in tech stack alignment at Force, because it's a way to get into the rep's workflow. And our customers are, there's the constant issue of tech sprawl. And if you have different platforms you're sending a rep to that aren't part of their day-to-day job and deal management, then you're creating some friction and some frustration, and probably just setting yourself up for poor usage. So definitely hearing this across the board with so many of our customers. And it's really cool when we can prioritize tech stack alignment with platforms that are really good at getting into those workflows like Accord.
I have a question from the audience, and I'm going to ask it here. I know that we do have time for Q&A at the end as well, but this question really does align here. And keep getting your questions in. Thank you so far to everybody who's gotten questions in. This one, I'm going to start with Noelle, and then I'm actually going to go to ask Ross to chime in on this one as well. For Noelle, you talked about building a system. How long does it take to build this system that you're talking about? We've tried doing it, but honestly, and we end up prioritizing other things because it takes us longer than we expect.
Yeah. I think the answer is it does take a long time, and I think it needs to be an iterative approach. I think the first version of what you develop will never be the final version. I think it's really critical, similar to what Ross shared before. You need to launch a version, get seller feedback, and iterate on that motion over time to ensure that what you're putting out there actually is the language of your sellers, right? You want them to feel like it's their voice and that it's powerful with our customers, but you also want to make sure that it works, right? You need to make sure that it's actually creating faster deal cycles, you're converting at a faster rate, you're creating high quality experiences that your customers or prospects are talking about. And so I don't think there's a perfect answer on how long. I think it depends on the complexity of your size, your industries that you're supporting, the types of customers that you have. But I think the short answer is the first version will not be your final version, and you need to be signing yourself up to iterate over time as that process evolves and as you're getting feedback from your teams.
And Ross, same kind of question. So you see this often, right? Like this is one of the things that you do at Accord. We know that it takes a long time. We know that it kind of depends. When people sit down, and executives on this call who are watching this, when they say like, oh, I have to come up with these system frameworks, how long should they expect their teams to be able to execute?
Similar answer to Noelle, but I would say maybe very tactically, you need someone full-time thinking about this. I think this often becomes like someone's side project, and then they also own a bunch of other tools, and then they're doing the admin stuff, and then something changes next quarter. I think, and it doesn't need to be that senior. I'm actually seeing a lot of like lower mid-market, even startup SMB companies hire someone junior, hire someone that is, 2, 3, 4 years out of school that has maybe a mix of product, maybe they're in that function and they have a background in maybe CS and product, so they can kind of put together that intuition around how to build and work with the frontline people and design the systems. So it doesn't have to be some, staff level, principal level engineer, go to market, design person that costs $400,000 a year. Could be someone, that costs 70, 80K a year that you commit, and they're the PM for that. I think it's really important to have someone who owns it, and it's not something separate, or you're never going to make like Noelle said, like it's about the iteration is the thing, not the first version of it. And so you're going to kind of like, screw yourself from day one to be successful on this project if it's someone spends a quarter and stands something up.
Yeah, I would +1 that, Ross. I think it's really critical in today's world where you have both internal tools and third-party external tools. You essentially need to have a product manager responsible for that tool.
Yes.
They need to understand what is the 3-year roadmap. How do I break that down into quarterly milestones to achieve that roadmap? What are my success metrics to know if it's working or not? That's something that Samsara has built internally, both for our in-house tools, but also our third-party tools, is you have a responsible party that is visioning in partnership with those tools of where we're going to take it next. And to your point, it doesn't have to be someone overly senior, but it's someone that can work with the field to understand what's working and what's not and have that iterative approach long term.
Yeah, and I guess one final quick bit on this. I think whether you're C-level, whether you're VP, whether you're at the operator level, you have to be able to reach across the different cross-functional teams and aisles and be able to pull together a very concrete plan that shows what outcomes you're going to get by building this system and this methodology. And sometimes you'll look around and you won't have a resource to do that, and you have to do it yourself, right? And I think I see Noelle smiling. I know Ross and I have talked about this a lot, but like sometimes that's you, and oftentimes the juice is worth the squeeze. So I would urge everybody, if you're thinking about making some changes to the strategy and you don't have folks to execute at that level, you might have to take the plunge and get it done yourself.
The right stuff will build that momentum. Kind of going back to like the field level stuff, like if it's the right time, the right project, the right initiative, you just have to get it started. That's what I really often see is like, that executive spend that extra week, 2 or 3, bringing the right people into the conversations, building other champions, and kind of gets a life of its own when enough people see it and it resonates with. And then it's like obvious. Then when it's across 4 different functions and you're splitting, everything 20% or 25%, then it's super easy to say, hey, everyone chip in, $15K, $20K a budget, and we can either buy this or have an owner on it. It's really hard to do when it's siloed. So yeah, I think that's a really good point of building those cross-functional champions early so you can kind of share the load.
Excellent. We've got some questions around that. I am going to hold some of those, but keep getting your questions in. Again, the chat box, the Q&A box, you've got a couple different ways to do it. Alan, I'm going to direct this one to you. How has Greenhouse created a consistent standard for inspecting deals and coaching reps, especially across different managers or regions?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So I think, the big problem that we faced for a while was lack of consistency executing the strategy in the field. Translating that strategy into something people are actually going to do and adopt and be successful in their roles. So back in the day, every greenhouse manager inspected deals in their own way. Some ran medic, some ran a homegrown checklist, some were creating account plans and book plans, and some weren't. So processing coaching quality to some extent was a function of like who your manager was. And the result was, as you'd expect, forecast accuracy was uneven, deal velocity was mixed, and a top rep on one team could have been a middle rep on another, depending on how the leadership cards were dealt. And that's never a good situation to be in. So we did 3 things. And in retrospect, I think the order we did them in mattered. First, we picked one methodology and made it the language that we speak as an organization, which, no surprise, being here on this webinar was command of message. And this became our seller identity at the leadership level first, and then eventually in the field. Every escalation, expansion opportunity, deal review uses the same vocabulary now, and that's really important. SDRs all the way through to CSMs and even our professional services arm. Like if somebody says a PBO in a meeting, the whole company knows that means a positive business outcome. And they know that we're all on the hook for ensuring customers hit those documented goals. The second thing that we did, we trained the trainers and embedded this into our onboarding and enablement culture. We don't fly force management out every quarter, right? We built a facilitator program where our managers get certified to coach the methodology. Luckily, we have a really great RevOps and enablement function to help us with those strategic projects. So command of message coaching scales as the org continues to grow and change. And 3, we hardwired the methodology into the systems. So Salesforce fields mirror command of message. Gong call trackers pick up on the language that we'd expect to hear: economic buyer, champion, decision criteria, PBOs. And then Accord became the customer-facing application of everything I just described. Mutual success plans, org chart mapping, multi-threading, driving, conversations around value drivers. That all happens now in a shared space with the customer versus happening in an email somewhere where that thread gets lost. So inspection went from being ambiguous to becoming a more simple question, which is, hey, does the Accord exist? Yes or no? And did the customer engage with it? And we know, because we built the Accord on the back of command of message, that if the Accord is built, the customer understands what the value of Greenhouse is, right? So that's the proxy for it. I'll talk a little bit more about some of the experimental stuff we did as well outside of Accord and command of message, but I know, Joe, you had a question around tooling, and I'll probably bring some of that stuff up when we get there.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves. I love it. Does anyone else have anything that they want to add on this slide about standardizing deal inspection? I do have a question that came in as well, but I would love to hear from you all before we get to that question.
One of the things that we've done to try to standardize the way that we coach is leaning a little bit more into AI-driven scorecards in Gong. And that's been a huge differentiator for us. And the reason for it is we don't have to invest a ton of time on calibrating our managers on what good looks like related to command of the message. That's where we're investing a lot of our time coaching. But we can actually use these AI scorecards to understand across all of our calls, what are we doing really well that aligns to command of the message, and where are some of our hotspots? And it's actually pretty clear where our hotspots are. That way we can identify what is the additional enablement or manager coaching that we can do in the next quarter to try to minimize how much friction we have in those areas. So that's been a big game changer for us, and it takes a lot of the load off of our managers. It also just builds in some confidence into our RevOps team that we are standardized in the way that we're coaching moving forward.
So on this section here, Alan, a question came in, and I think this is something you're going through this, or you've done it, or you're doing this process. And as we've talked, it's an iterative process. You're never done. But someone has asked about change management. Has adopting this training been a smooth process? Change management on process changes like this can often have a tough time rolling out for our organization.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that's a challenge for any organization. There's always a lot of friction when there's change that's introduced. I think we talked about a lot of some of the stuff of how you overcome that earlier. You really need your executive champion. You really need operators who are going to pull together the methodology and the tooling and make this like a first-class way that you sell or manage your customer base. And then once the field and the customers start to see that difference and we get some wins, other people naturally want to jump onto that goodness, right? So, but yeah, it's taken multiple iterations. I mean, look, we've been a force management shop for almost a decade now, I think. And as tools change, as automation changes, you're always going to have to update. And you're always bringing more change into the organization. And I think getting people used to that being a constant and something that's just part of the job is really important culturally. So that's something that we also try to do. Like tomorrow is going to be a different greenhouse than today, and that's okay.
I have a quick question for Kate, Noelle, and Alan about that, because this is what I hear and see a lot is we're not ready for this. Culturally, we don't have the right people and we don't have the right leadership to do this. To me, that screams you're the most qualified group to do this with. But sometimes with technology, I find that the people that actually get it the most are the most likely to buy, where there's actually the smallest delta between what you're doing today and what you would do with it, because you're kind of already doing it. So I'm curious to hear from your perspectives, like when you were bringing on force and Accord and kind of these cultural changes, how do you deal with, both championing the people that are driving this stuff, that are the change agents internally, and how do you deal with the people that aren't there, that kind of, it's hard to, put positively, but kind of get left behind, right? That aren't going to be part of the future, that aren't agreeing to, we're going to stick to a process, we're going to agree upon a language, we're going to standardize because maybe they're more comfortable in the messy middle stuff, which there's a place for those people. So yeah, curious to hear your takes on the cultural aspects. And I think that's the trickiest part of all of this.
Yeah, I can share a few thoughts. I think you need to have success stories to share to get people bought in if they aren't already bought in. One of the things that we've noticed, and we just adopted command of the message at the beginning of this fiscal year, so it's still new for us. But when we were looking back on our Q1 results, one of the really interesting themes that we saw is that our ramping enterprise reps were performing stronger than any other enterprise ramping reps we've seen before. So if you look at like quarter over quarter improvement, something is working. Something is telling us that when we give them the guidance on how to communicate Samsara's value effectively to our customers based on their industry or based on their size, it's landing. It's getting them to be able to generate pipe faster, ship more trials. Now, that's very early innings, but that is a narrative that you can start to share to get people bought in on what's the value this type of standardized methodology and consistent value messaging could drive for the business. So I think it's like having those success stories can go a really long way. It takes time to build those, but even if you have folks internally that are champions from previous companies, those are helpful success stories to weave in as well.
I completely agree, Noelle. I think agreeing on what are the success metrics we're going to track, watching how they're trending, socializing that, and of course, getting proof points or success stories from actual deal successes and sharing those can be really impactful. Same with Accord successes. I'm using Accord with my customer. It helped me get the deal, et cetera. I think for us up front, it's so critical from a force management perspective that we have a CRO CEO team that's really on board, really bought into this initiative, that's well aligned with it could be sales enablement, it could be go-to-market programs team, could be a services team, kind of the execution arm of what we're going to roll out. And if those kind of two roles get along and believe in the value of each other's roles and work well together, then we're so much better set up for success initially. When we go through a change management program with our customers, we have some milestones that bring together a lot of cross-functional roles. So as we kind of go through that process, we might come across more skeptics or people who need to learn more before they're ready to get bought in. So we're able to pick some of that change management up, I think help our customers with some of that change management as we have kind of these milestones that bring together cross-functional leadership roles. But then so much of it falls in the long term on people who sit in Noelle's or Alan's seat in making sure that we're tracking the success metrics, that we're looking at our systems and seeing where the struggle areas are, that we're working on remediation plans, or that we have a training program set up for the long term. And that's so critical for long-term success, I think, as well.
We've got to keep your questions coming. We're going to have time for a lot of questions at the end as well. But I have a question now for Noelle. There's a lot of excitement around AI in sales. It's what people have been talking about for a long time now, but it's only as good as the data behind it. And how has Samsara ensured that your deal data is structured and consistent enough for AI to actually drive meaningful insights? Because this is something that I think a lot of people struggle with. This is one of those very difficult things to get right. How are you doing it?
Yeah, I think there is so much excitement about AI in sales and broader go-to-market roles right now, but a lot of it is going to disappoint people, not because the technology isn't capable, but because you cannot extract signal from noise. And most companies' CRMs are just noisy today. We hear that all the time. So when we started our internal AI engine, we had to be very clear-eyed about this. AI is not going to fix any bad data that we have. It's only going to amplify it. And so if your reps are entering free text notes inconsistently, if the qualification fields are blank, if your deal stages don't map to actual buyer behavior, an AI layer on top of that will tell you the wrong thing 9 out of 10 times, right? And it's going to tell you it confidently. So in my opinion, doing something the wrong way is just worse than doing nothing at all. So before we could get into intelligence at Samsara, we had to get structure. So that meant two things for us happening in parallel. We invested pretty heavily in defining what good deal data actually looks like. So what fields matter, what methodology were we going to use? That was command of the message coming in, what signals we needed to capture, and how we wanted to represent our buyer engagement, stakeholder mapping, and things like competitive positioning. So we aligned all of that to command of the message framework. So there was a consistent framework driving what reps were entering, not just that they were entering information. And then secondly, we made a lot of our tools do the work on the rep's behalf. So rather than asking our reps to manually structure data or enter it, because let's be honest, they probably wouldn't, but we actually extracted and populated a lot of that structured data that we wanted to capture from call recordings, email threads, Accord activity. So we had this like really deep intelligence layer or an active account state that was updating constantly. And so what the AI is reading is actually what's happening in the deal versus us trying to wait for the rep to input the information. And the downstream benefit of all of that is real. So we have clean, structured, methodology-aligned data across thousands and thousands of deals, and that can actually tell you something useful. It can tell you things like which deals are at risk and why, which deals have a higher likelihood of expanding or buying, maybe where are we getting stuck in the sales cycle, what are some of those leading indicators of a successful close? And those insights can change how our leaders coach, how you call the quarter. I mean, there's so many benefits there. So the way that we have thought about it at Samsara is AI is an amplifier, and our job as the RevOps team is to make sure what we're amplifying is actually worth amplifying. And so for us, it's like structure first, get your data right, and then focus on the intelligence. And you can't mix up that order. Otherwise, what you're bringing to the field isn't going to be beneficial, and you're going to lose the credibility and buy-in from a pretty early start.
The idea of structuring the data is super interesting. We actually had a question of, has anyone on the call tried to go back on old data and try to clean that up so that it aligns with the structures that you're building now? Is that something that Noelle or Alan, have either one of you tried to do that?
I think similar to what I shared, less of us like going into old data, more of us leveraging the insights we have on our accounts through call recordings, emails, Slacks, whether it's internal, external, and trying to extract insights from that has been more beneficial than us trying to do like detailed cleanups or asking reps to update fields. We just get such little buy-in on that. We really have to like use our own devices to try to get the accurate insights that we drive off of.
There's an interesting question. So it's Martin, your question. I'm going to ask your full question later, but the second part of your question I think is really interesting, and I want to ask it here. As we're talking about getting reliable insights from AI, we're talking about, structuring those things out. Are you running control groups on that? Is everyone just expected to automatically pick all of this up? How are you trying to bear out the process is worth it based on the outcomes?
Yeah, I'm happy to start there if anyone else wants to jump in. We are big on running pilots. So we will start with smaller groups, run a pilot for a week or two with very concentrated effort to suss out what's going to work, what's not, what's accurate, what's falling behind. And then, like I shared before, we're a big ship fast, iterate type of company. So we ship what we call our MVPs, kind of our most viable products first. We use those pilot groups and just like initial launches to get early team feedback. And then we'll iterate over time. So you can think of our products as always evolving. And I'm talking about our internal products, so kind of the AI engines, things like that. But they're never in their final state. We should expect those to continue to evolve as our company shifts, as our industry shifts, as our customers change. So it's kind of that ever evolution that we focus on.
Yeah, similar on our end. We run a lot of pilots. I think a lot of companies are open to running pilots and letting you try stuff out because it's so new. We're moving to a methodology where we're going to have some centralized teams that are building our internal apps. Right now, I think it can be a little bit ad hoc. So we're standing up a function for that imminently. And then that'll sort of be a joint venture between R&D and RevOps. And then we're actually installing AI leads into each one of the departments and functional areas to work with that centralized unit to make sure that things that are getting built are aligned with those parts of the business. So that whole apparatus is kind of being stood up now as sort of a V2 of how we think about building, internal AI tools and apps.
Makes total sense. Now, we're here, we're talking about tech stack, we're talking about all of these different things. There are a lot of tools available. And at Greenhouse, Alan, when you think about your tech stack, what changes have made the biggest difference in aligning your tools with your sales process instead of having them compete with it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, if you look back like 2 years ago, our stack looked like any other enterprise SaaS setup. Salesforce for prospect and customer data, Gong for calls, Seismic for content. You'd have homegrown account plans in Google Docs. Every tool was good on its own and like optimized pretty well for that function, but then the sum of that actually worked against the rep and just created a bunch of noise and confusion and inconsistency. So the shift kind of happened when we stopped asking what tool do we need and more what's the strategy, and then what tools would enhance that strategy. So that reframing did a bunch of heavy lifting for us as we started to consolidate those tools down into a smaller stack and start making them work for us. So 3 pretty big decisions there. One, I talked a little bit about Accord, became our customer facing operating layer. And as part of that, we also depreciated some other tools and put those savings into Accord. So this also helped cut down on oversaturation and spend. 2, we stopped fighting Salesforce. I think somebody asked about, has anyone gone back into the old data? That's something that we actually did. So we rewrote schemas, the page layouts, the validation rules to match command of message and Medic. That's all integrated and linked up with Gong forecasting now, which, again, our forecasting metric has gotten much tighter over the past like 18 months, which is very helpful to the overall business. And our mandate there is if you can't fill out the fields, you can't move the stages. So it's boring infrastructure work, but it makes everything else possible. And then 3, as I mentioned earlier about experimental stuff, we also built our own AI tool called Sage that fits really nicely into this overall ecosystem. So it pulls every Gong call, email, Salesforce field, every Accord artifact on a deal. It runs it through the command of message framework, and then it produces a structured readout with source citations in about 2 minutes. So a manager, prepping for a one-on-one used to spend an hour catching up on all those different areas and kind of cobbling their own story together. Now they get a structured, consistent readout like every other manager in a fraction of the time. So it took that consistency solely out of the manager's hands and kind of puts it into the system. Alongside Sage, we use Glean for company-wide AI search. So that's sort of plugged into our customer data. And then we have, like I said earlier, Claude Code and Cowork for workflow enhancements, and that's kind of scattered throughout the entire organization. I think as the last piece of advice that I'd offer on this whole thing is sequencing really matters. And I kind of said it before, if you start with the tool and try to retrofit the methodology, you'll burn years and likely end up back where you started. So confronting the methodology and the strategy first, even if you feel like your organization isn't ready for that, you have to force that and then layer the tools in on top of that once you figure it out.
Well, first of all, I'm just going to say thank you real quick to everybody because this has been remarkable. And the section when we were talking about reliable insights really got people going. We have questions, and if you have questions, get them in. This is your chance now. The chat function, the Q&A function. This is your last chance to ask questions. But I have some questions already. The first thing that I want to do is I want to go back to Martin's question here, and I'll start out with Alan and Noelle, and then I would like to hear from Ross on this one as well. How are you developing ROI cases on the AI spend? Are you running AI tool implementation alongside control groups? And I know that we talked about pilots, but I want to hear more about developing ROI cases for your AI spend. Let's start with Noelle and then Alan.
Yeah, I think similar to when we evaluate any tool, irrelevant on if it's an AI-driven tool or not, we always identify what are our success metrics. And then as we're piloting that tool, we understand if it's actually moving the needle towards that success metric. Are we seeing an ROI from the tool that we'd expect? Or maybe even a different ROI than what we'd expected, but it's adding value back to the business that we can explain. So I actually don't think our approach is any different, whether it's an AI tool, both in-house and external, or just one of our standard SaaS tools that we've purchased. You need to be able to like understand what is the value that that tool is going to provide you. And then are you actually seeing it move the needle as you start to pilot and try it out?
Yeah, I don't have too much to add on top of that. It's very similar to how we think about it. Definitely as a first order focused on outcomes, and then as a second order efficiencies. And like I said earlier, there's some tools that have allowed us to cut down on our stack. There's some stuff that we have to layer on top of it because we're looking to get certain outcomes out of that functionality. So it just depends on what our end goal is. And then to Noelle's point, making sure that we have success metrics tied to that and we can prove out that we've gotten that thing, whether it's a net new outcome or whether it's an efficiency that lets us consolidate.
Ross, do you have any tips there for folks on getting that AI spend and getting ROI cases?
I think I always think about people first. So it's like, who's the person that's going to sponsor that going as high as possible? It's like, who's the person championing this at the C-suite or VP level, and bugging them. And like we've talked a lot about, like, how do you start small with the right group that is going to kind of set the bar for what the rest of the organization? How do you show the team the art of the possible? It's like, hey, if I can get this group to do this and see these results, what's to stop us from getting everyone? So yeah, I think the biggest challenge is when you overwhelm the other potential decision makers and kind of scare when it's like, hey, this is the big thing we can do because you're excited about it. How do you start actually as small as possible? I think is the path of least resistance. And then you see it actually happening on the field and take it out of a briefing doc or a deck and make it something that, like we talked about at the beginning, that's customer validated. How do you get a customer to actually say something? How do you get a result from a marketing campaign or from a sales process or from a renewal expansion? It's like, we got this because of this, AI, whatever initiative it is. So that's kind of my take. Start as small as possible. And grow from there.
Yeah, and the meta take too, right, is use AI to help you build those ROI cases and pitch decks, right? Like the pitch deck that I had for Accord, I had Claude Cowork help me put that together. After hours of meetings and strategy docs and conversations that happened, it's a lot easier than going back and reading through all that and trying to do it manually. So
yeah, and Ross, the reason I did ask you as well was because someone had a question here that is, I see this as a critical problem, but none of the rest of my executive team does. You mentioned that the juice is worth the squeeze, but I'm just not finding it easy enough to bring this to life. And then they actually had a follow-up, which was, doing yourself is a good idea. Do you have a good idea for a first step to kind of do this themselves?
Yeah, and this was kind of around that question earlier, which is like, how do you get, like, if there's the people that are the change agents that like see the vision, that are probably doing a version of this in their org, whether it's the methodology process that they rolled out, whether it's sales process consistency, whether it's, whatever, they're trying to get the rest of the org to see the light. And sometimes they get a lot of pushback when it's something new, especially if the company's been successful for a long time. I think that's like one of the most consistent things we see these days is companies done well, maybe in spite of some of this stuff. Now the market's changed and there's more competition or more challenging, competitive dynamics, whatever it is. And it's really hard to shift a ship that has been successful for a long time that has a lot of decision makers and folks involved. And that's, again, kind of going back to like, how do you just prove it out with your own team and function? But I think at the same time, people are hungry for change and bold decisions. And I think people don't realize that. I think like you sense a lot of fear, but I think the people with that fear and that kind of like group default to doing nothing, status quo mindset, they're actually craving someone to come with a big bet and a bold change. And I've seen just like the re-energizing of organizations from like, hey, like now we can go down a path. We can use this as the excuse, whether it's an AI tool, whether it's a new kind of like value selling, process like a force. They use that as the cultural change and everyone rallies around it. It's kind of the excuse to get everyone to be on the same page of something. So that's where I've seen the success of, I'll even say like a quarter force. It's less to do about what the thing is. It's more about the rallying cry to get everyone across functionally and from leadership down to the frontline sellers to get on the same page around what your company's doing. So that's kind of one of my thoughts is like, everyone's hungry for it. Don't be afraid to be the person that is driving that change, and you're going to see great things from it.
It highlights the importance of the role of a seller or an account manager, CS person long term. If you notice your change agent feels some misalignment from the top, which is common, maybe there's a leadership change or something like that. I think it's part of the duty of a good partner. If you become a good trusted advisor, maybe you can help them with that conversation and, help them build a business case, offer to join them with the new leadership or whatever it may be. If it's early on, then, same thing. It's really the role of the seller in how do I help? Maybe it's my coach, gain more influence, give them more, help them with their business case, join them in that, and see if we can get anywhere. And if not, maybe it's not the right fit for the right time.
I love that. And I have a question for you, Kate. So we're talking here about, a lot of people are talking about like auditing tech stacks and bringing these things together. We've talked about how to align all of these things along with your methodologies, along with all of the different parts of your sales motions. From your perspective, what are some of the specific steps that we can take to begin auditing our tech stack to maybe bring some of this to the executive team and above?
Yes, I think it starts with who is the person that's doing the audit? Do they have visibility into everything that's in the tech stack? And then getting a good understanding of what are the outcomes that each of these systems are supposed to be driving? What is the user base? Who is the user base? What does usage look like across those? And who's the admin with, associated with each of these things? Are we seeing outcomes driven across all of these? And then on top of that, it's okay, how do we prioritize where we may want to add more process or drive more usage, or where we may want to investigate if something's not driving the outcome that we want. And sometimes it points to, we can build more methodology alignment here. And of course, you can bring in Force to help with that or help with some of kind of the auditing of what you've got and where you may want to prioritize. But there's so many departments and people and kind of that side of systems that come into looking across the tech stack. And the bigger the company, the kind of the more complex it can get. So I think best case scenario is you have companies who like Samsara and Greenhouse are somewhat on top of it, continuing to make changes. I think Alan mentioned having a separate group now as part of the company's evolution to take hold of all the maybe agents they're building plus technologies that they have. So you've got R&D and RevOps working together. So I think being open to that change and that evolution and having owners who look at what's there and make sure that you get value out of it is critical.
Noelle, I have a question for you, and this will probably be our last question, and then I'll take us to the outro, and then we'll have you all ready for the rest of your day. What teams have you seen be most effective in creating these systems? You said it should be someone's full-time role, but we don't have space for headcount. Does this live in product, CS, enablement, RevOps? ? So where do you see this living if someone doesn't have the ability to make this a full-time role?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think like every company is probably a little bit different, and I think it probably depends where you have the skill set to support this. I can tell you what Samsara has done. I think we definitely have had the luxury of having top-down buy-in that this is really important. And so we have chosen to invest in what we're calling a revenue technology team, which is essentially like our internal product management team for our revenue tools. And that product management team, both internal tools and external tools, are responsible for PMing the growth of these tools. So like I said, they're responsible for the long-term roadmap. They're the ones working directly with our machine learning and data engineering team that supports our go-to-market orgs on developing these tools and evolving them over time, improving the data that's within the systems. But I think if you don't have that type of infrastructure, I think it really just depends where you have the right skill set. Do you have individuals that have the ability to build? I think in today's world where everyone can have access to Cloud Cowork or Code or Cursor, anyone can be a builder. You just need to make sure you have someone that has the right vision and has the support of enablement or some sort of change management team that can help drive the change internally in your business. You can't have the builder also do all the change management. It needs to be a partnership. Otherwise, it'll just kind of fall flat.
Kate, I want to ask you that same question too. You work with our customers. You see this a lot. Do you know that is there a team where you see, like, if we can't dedicate a person, this is the team that usually has a really good chance at implementing?
You mean implementing any given new tool, or?
I would say that if they're talking about, because we've talked a lot about bringing everything together. So is there someone that is usually a person on a team that is usually a good person to bring that up? Is it a manager? Does it start at that level? Is there like a specific team that you see roll this out more effectively than others?
I think historically, as Alan mentioned earlier, you had a lot of these kind of revenue enablement tools sitting under RevOps, and we've seen a shift across our customers into maybe creating new groups or departments that own these tools, plus kind of the strategic priorities as it relates to building. Like Noelle said, anyone can be a builder now, and making sure that that's prioritized well is something we're seeing a lot of companies create, specific arms to do that. And I think that's great. We have also helped some of our customers who've asked us to help with taking a look at their tech stack as kind of a singular project. So we do this anyway if we roll out something like Command the Message, but we also could separately conduct workshops with our customers where we look across tech stack, try to bring the various roles together, particularly if it's a large company that says, we're not really sure who's owning this. We want you guys to come in to help us figure out who that could be, who the owners are across it. So we can kind of build out our plan. So that's another option as well.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Now, if you have a question that didn't get answered, please email me at joseph.huber@forcemanagement.com, and I'll do what I can to get you an answer. I want to give a thank you right now to Noelle. Thank you so much for coming on. To Alan, thank you so much for your time. Ross, thank you for your time. And Kate, thank you for your time and knowledge. A final thank you to everyone in the audience who is with us live, or if you're catching the recording, we really do appreciate you taking the time to learn with us. Thank you to all of you who are here, and to all of our speakers for sharing their amazing knowledge with us. With that, we'll leave you to it. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you all have the best day ever. Take care.